Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery podcast. Today I wanted to talk to you about what is eco-conscious pottery because it's like a very broad term, and I just think it'd be probably quite good just to kind of talk about the different ways, the different aspects and different kind of areas that pottery can be eco-conscious potentially. Okay, so this is probably just going to raise like loads of questions rather than like giving any answers, but I'm just going to kind of go through all the different parts of pottery that can be potentially kind of transformed, into like a more kind of eco-conscious practice, basically. Okay, so the first thing that we'll look at is materials. That's the most kind of obvious thing, is like pottery materials. So an eco-conscious pottery practice will be thinking about, what are the materials that are being used? Where do they come from? How far away do they come from? How much, carbon emissions are used from extracting them from the earth? How much is used in processing them and haulage, getting them to me? So, it could be things like, if you're thinking about, an eco-conscious part of that could be like maybe choosing materials that are like closest to you or that are mined in, it could be like countries where like the energy mix of the country is, from renewable sources rather than fossil fuels. It could be thinking about like who is mining your products, your kind of raw materials. So it could be, are artisanal miners mining some of your pottery materials? And that's people who are mining, self-employed miners, in the informal mining sector. So they're working in kind of like dangerous, hazardous conditions, or are like commercial companies mining your raw materials, and what kinds of environmental degradation has happened in terms of like those materials being mined. So it could be looking at like the kind of regulation of an area, like how is the environment, how are people protected in that region, and what are the civic structures in place to kind of like protect and hold people to hold companies, hold people damaging the environment, to account. So in terms of materials, those are the kind of main areas to cover. And then there's another part which is like tools. So like pottery tools, pottery tools are like essential to like our work, our practice. And but it's quite easy just to kind of forget about the fact that like tools are like manufactured. What are they being manufactured from? Where are they being manufactured? So if you take, for example, really standard pottery tools such as like paintbrushes, you can look at things like, could you use synthetic paintbrushes rather than ones made with animal hair? So quite a lot of paintbrushes are made with animals in the fur industry. So it's kind of just looking at like are there alternatives available to the kind of maybe art brushes that you are potentially using that are made with animal hairs. It could be things like thinking about the type of sponge that you use. This might seem like really like quite random, but a sponge is probably, I would say, a potter's almost like most important tool. I was thinking of doing a whole episode on sponges and I decided against it. No, too much talking about sponges. Probably can't talk about sponges for a whole episode, but just to mention the sponges, there are kind of three main types of sponge. There's a kind of, there's ones made of plastic, then there's ones made of cellulose fibre, and then there's ones made of, marine sponge is like it's like an animal. So, and it's the skeleton of the animal. So, they're basically taken from the sea, and then the animal dies, and then that's the skeleton of the animal. That's the natural marine sponge. And lots of potters use marine sponge because it's very soft, but cellulose sponges, which are made from plants, they biodegrade, they're very easily available, they're very cheap. You can get them in like the supermarket, hardware shop. Those are the sponges which I use. I think they're really good. I think they're a really good alternative to natural sponges because they are like not quite as soft as a natural sponge, but they just do, just as good a job, in my opinion. So there's lots of things around tools. You can sort of have a think about like, where are my tools coming from? Who's made them? Where are they derived from, basically. And then there's the next area of pottery, eco-conscious pottery potential, is practices. So, so think about, I guess, like the eco-conscious, lens would be things like, how much energy am I using in my practice for certain things? So if you think about like, say like you have an electric kiln, it could be like, is my kiln energy efficient? Could I be doing like less firings, like fitting more stuff in the kiln? Could I be not firing things that I probably won't, want down the line? It could be, could I fire things less, with maybe like a raw glazing technique, which we'll do like another whole episode on raw glazing, which is an amazing practice where you basically don't do a bisque firing. So kind of energy use, is there anything else I can do to save energy? Am I using things like, a lot of heating, or something that I could let dry naturally that I'm trying to dry quickly? Could I just leave a bit more time? So that's something to consider. And then, there's other things like water use as well. Could I be recycling water? Collecting rainwater, from the roof, and using that in my practice. So so there's loads and loads of different things. Avoiding wastage is another thing that you can do. If you just think about like sort of the energy it's taking to like reclaim your clay and stuff. Is there anything you can do that would like just kind of use less offcuts, or save yourself like materials or anything like that? So I hope you've enjoyed this episode on eco-conscious pottery. So you can see with eco-conscious pottery, it's like there are so many things that we can apply to pottery, and you can do like one thing, or like one tiny thing, or just try and basically apply a kind of eco-conscious approach to like all of our stuff, or not. It's like I think sometimes it's just like kind of like knowing, how to make a change is like really fantastic. Then you can kind of like decide whether or not to like input any changes if you want to or not. And sometimes I do think, not knowing information, I definitely found that was a barrier when I first started practicing pottery. I just didn't really even know where the materials came from. So if you're really interested in this, you want to learn like more, basically I've spent a long time researching eco-conscious pottery and potential changes that can be made for potters. So I've made two ebooks really on this topic, and one is Ecofriendly Pottery, sort of 30 simple ways to make your pottery practice more ethical and sustainable, and that just goes through the kind of main 30 ways I found that can be really effective and really easy to implement as a potter, in terms of like making your pottery more eco-conscious. And then there's another book which is specifically kind of aimed at people who are sort of like thinking about like maybe making their own glazes, or just want to know more about the glaze materials they're using. And so it goes through every like glazing material that you basically would put in a glaze, and talks about like good ones to use and maybe less good ones to use in terms of like socially, environmentally. And that book is called Eco-Conscious Pottery Glazing. Make your own pottery glazes with minimal harm to humans, animals and the environment. So both of those books are available on the Oxford Clay website, and also Amazon if you want like a paper copy as well, and the links are in the show notes. Yeah, so like there's loads of ways, there's loads of information out there. It's just, it can be kind of like a bit confusing, like try and, like find the information. But yeah, I've collected it all in those books. And yeah, like thank you so much for joining me for this episode. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. And have a great week and happy potting. So if you liked that and you're interested in learning more about pottery, eco-conscious pottery, tools and techniques for potters, there's so much for you on the Oxford Clay website. There's blogs, ebooks, e-courses, video courses, and I can't wait to see you there. So the website is www.oxfordclay.co.uk.